So far, you have watched lectures on how we co-construct knowledge and how that relates to other cognitive and behavioral factors. This lecture is going to focus on when we're most likely to imitate someone else. So we're in a social context, someone's doing something, and we're going to learn from that. But when are we most likely to actually engage in that behavior and reproduce that behavior? And for this discussion, I'm going to start with one of my favorite all-time studies called the Ash effect. Ash was the researcher, and he had participants come into this lab, and they were given the standard line, and the task was to pick which line, A, B, or C, is the same length as X. So I'll give you a second. The correct answer is B, and this should be fairly obvious that the line X and the line B are the same size. But what happened in the experiment is that a group of people would be there. There was one participant, and the other people, I think they're called Confederates. They're not actually a participant. They're actually part of the research team trying to develop the social situation. And that whole group said it was a different line. And so imagine if you were in the situation, obviously the answer is B, but everybody else in the group is saying that actually it's C. And what happens is if you are, so the x-axis is percentage of correct responses, so how often were you to say, no, actually it's B, guys, across this number of trials. If there was no opposition, meaning there was no one in your group, it's just you and you're making this choice, about 100% of the time you're correct. It's not a hard task. You should be able to do it. If there's one other person with you and that other person is conflicting, if they're saying it's either A or C, at first you're at 100. The first two trials you're at 100, but then you drop down to almost 80. You're hovering a little bit lower. You're more willing to go with that other person. That purple line at the very bottom, if you're in a group and they say there's 4 other people and all 4 people are saying A, and you're the only person who thinks it's a different line, about 60% of the time you're going to go with the rest of the group. And what I love about the ASH study is it highlights that there's situations where even when the answer is really clear, we're willing to follow or learn from the other people in the room. And so what I want to talk about now is when are we most likely to imitate people? So we are more likely to imitate people who are, so describing the other person, if they are perceived as warm and nurturing. And so the image here is just of the same person, but the photo's digitally enhanced to make them appear colder, less caring, versus warmer. They're more willing to listen and be on your side and be sympathetic. And so if you're dealing with someone who's cold, you're probably not going to imitate them. But if they're warm and nurturing, maybe those are things that are valued by you. You're more likely to imitate that person. You're also more likely to imitate people who are similar to you. And I said this in a previous lecture about, would I imitate someone who dunked a basketball? Well, because I'm short and I'm not tall and I don't have an interest in basketball, I probably wouldn't be likely to try and imitate that behavior. But if someone my height and my ability was able to get up there and dunk a basketball, I would be so intrigued. I would want to try it too. And so really we're likely to see, hey, if that person can do it and they're like me, then I probably can get away with that as well. And finally, we're likely to imitate people who are in an authoritative position or a higher social status. And so in this case, I put a picture in here of a doctor. If the doctor tells you to do something, people tend to just listen and far less are questioning. And this leads us to another classic study by Milgram, where he was interested when people are going to be obedient to an authority figure, so someone higher up than you. And he ran this study on this left-hand picture. Someone came in, the participant comes in, and they are asked to administer a shock. They're told that it's a study about learning and that there's somebody that's attached to an electrical impulse. and that your job is to ask them the question, and if they get it wrong, to shock them. And that by shocking them, you're going to be improving their memory. That's the task. But actually, no one's attached to the machine. It's just the subject. And you can see that there's an experimenter in their room who's going to urge the participants to keep going. And the middle picture is actually of a participant who's administering the shocks. And what they hear is, on the other side, the person starts screaming, "Ow, this really hurts, ow, I can't take it, please stop, ow, ow, the pain's terrible, please stop." And eventually, and the shock power keeps increasing, getting higher and higher, till eventually the person, quote unquote, stops responding. Now, as I said before, there's not actually a person. That was a pre-recorded message. Everyone hears the same thing. And the question is, how high up in voltage will the participant go? How many shocks will they administer, and the voltage of their shocks gets stronger and stronger? I think something like 65% of participants go all the way, and a whole bunch more go pretty close to that final shock, that there's like a skull and crossbones underneath it. The person's is unresponsive, and they nevertheless administer these shocks. And so Milgram examined under what conditions are they more likely to administer the shock versus others, and that's summarized in that yellow graph. But the one I really wanted to highlight in this case, coming from the previous slide, is that when there's a person of authority or a higher social status, so authority might be a doctor, in this case it was the researcher with a nice little lab coat on, telling with a clipboard, telling the person what to do, you're willing to do it. And the same is true as if the person is of higher social status. Let's say within the confines of a classroom, if there's some cool kids in there that people are more willing to follow them than, say, kids with less social capital. Also, you can see in the yellow table is that when a peer administers a shock, that's when you're the most likely to copy that behavior. So if you were in there and you think you're in there with another participant that's just like you and they're doing it, and now it's your turn, you're more likely to do it. And again, thinking about what does that mean for a classroom context, that if you could get somebody to get buy-in, would that help you get buy-in from other students? The previous slides were focusing on the types of people we're more likely to imitate. This slide is on the types of situations that encourage us to be more likely to imitate. And that's the case when the situation is confusing, ambiguous, or unfamiliar. And this makes sense to me. If you don't really know what's going on, you come into this new situation you're not really familiar with, you don't really know how to behave, that you would look to other people who are navigating that successfully and say, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'll try that. Or if the situations provide those other people with rewards or reinforcement, so you watch them navigate it and they get some sort of positive outcome, you're more likely to say, cool, well, that situation can produce a positive outcome. I'm going to try it again too. So finally, we're going to look at what internal factors to ourselves makes us more likely to imitate. So we're more likely to imitate when we have been rewarded for imitating behaviors in the past. What if somebody engaged in a behavior, they were really quiet and they got a reward, and so you were really quiet and you got a reward, and you said, wow, it really worked to copy that person's behavior. And so then the next day you see that person and maybe now they're raising their hand and you say, well, they were successful when they were quiet and so was I. I'm going to try and copy them again. And so you're learning from your previous experiences imitating their behavior. You might also imitate behavior if you have low self-confidence or low self-efficacy. What this means is that you're not really confident that you can do something. You're not really sure what it is you can do or what you should do, and because of that, you might look to other people to help guide your behavior. So if you're high in self-efficacy, high in the belief that if you engage in a behavior, you're going to achieve your outcome. I have strong confidence in myself that if I could study now, I know I'll do well on that exam. Well, you tend to believe your goals are in reach. You have a positive view, so this is a challenge. You want to get a good grade. How can you master that? And it leads to having high commitment, because you know if you can do that work, you can get the outcome. And if there are any setbacks, changes to plans, the library's closed, you're more willing to persevere and get over those setbacks so that you can achieve your goal. So self-efficacy is about, I have a goal. I know that if I follow this plan, I can achieve that goal. You have high self-efficacy. If you have low self-efficacy, you actually think that you can't do it. There's a goal in mind, but you think there's no way you're going to be able to navigate it so that you have that outcome. And so you're going to avoid those tasks because you doubt your ability to be successful, and you're focusing more on the negative outcomes. If there are any setbacks, the library closed, that's when you go, oh, I knew I couldn't do it. What's the point? And you stop right there. Self-efficacy is specific. So it's not this global disposition that you have low self-efficacy across everything. It's that maybe you think, oh, I know I'm really strong in English, but I'm not so in math. I'm really great at interacting with other people, but I stink at school. It's very specific to the certain task at hand. And it's cyclical in that it develops from your own personal experience, the inactive experiences, or vicarious experiences by watching others. But that if you're developing low self-efficacy, or high self-efficacy in those environments by watching other people, that will also inform your willingness to engage in imitating their behaviors going forward. And so we can see this positive or negative feedback loop.